We believe brain health is a human right. We believe it's a social and economic imperative. At ABI, we're democratizing global brain health by giving people access to the best minds and evidence-based information from around the world. Together, we are distilling complex science and turning it into actionable knowledge for everyone, everywhere. Will you join us?
And a continuing welcome, all of you, to Aspen Brain Institute's 2021 Expert Series. We could not better initiate our program than with a reminder that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. But what we're really going to talk about today is love. The love between a father and his son, between a son and his father, a son who has become a father himself and is about to do so again. Our honored guest will be telling stories about love. The mission of the Aspen Brain Institute includes our commitment to the development of a brain-healthy planet, and there is no single ingredient as important to brain health as love. Our guest today is Zak Williams, son of the late actor and comedian Robin Williams. Zak is a mental health advocate whose advocacy takes many forms. His power comes from the clarity of his purpose to raise awareness of and increase access to support and effective treatment for the entire spectrum of mental health distress. Formally diagnosed post-mortem with Lewy body dementia, Zak's father suffered unimaginably with an undiagnosed, untreatable, inevitably terminal neurodegenerative condition for the last year of his life. Zak's father's terrible decline and ultimate suicide precipitated a period of profound emotional turmoil for Zak, the specifics of which he candidly and courageously shares with the public. He also speaks about his father's earlier life challenges with addiction and depression. But again, what is paramount beyond all other details about his father and his own mental health journey is his story of love, abiding and eternal. Zak, welcome to Aspen Brain Institute's Expert Series. We are truly delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Ronnie, thank you so much for having me today. I call you Ronnie. Also, I know you as Dr. Stangler. In getting to know you over the past couple months, it's been a real pleasure to really understand both the mission and the vision of the Aspen Brain Institute, but also getting a deeper understanding of where we can go through collaborating and building consortiums, supporting growing awareness and understanding of bringing high quality access and parity to all folks for mental health services, treatment, and protocols. So I will start with my story. I think it's one that brings me to mental health and mental health advocacy through a winding journey that ultimately led to me finding healing. And really that's what, for me personally, was the big epiphany, that a life of service is a life of happiness and healing. And through my experience, especially that experience associated with mental health issues and considerations, it's one that started early on in my life. I was a child who could be considered obsessive. I had obsessive compulsive behaviors, specifically relating to things like symmetry and counting. this was something that I just took for granted and found it to be just a part of my life. And as I segued from childhood to adolescence, this manifested more so in terms of insomnia and obsessive thinking that prevented me from sleeping well at night, and ultimately led me to finding solutions that I felt helped me over time. Solutions like alcohol, solutions like other types of drugs that would help me sleep at night and ultimately would contribute to my anxiety that I experienced pretty deeply over the course of my adolescence and then segueing into adulthood. And my experience with mental health considerations throughout adulthood then took on more of a lens of finding myself self-medicating to treat that anxiety and the stress and the bouts of depression that were associated with not being able to sleep well and also trying to use substances to self-medicate. I felt like it was a crutch for me, but ultimately it led me down a path of being unhappy, feeling mentally and emotionally dysregulated, and ultimately it increased and exacerbated the trauma that I experienced upon my dad dying by suicide. And the thing that I experienced prior to my dad dying by suicide, especially relating to what he was going through with his bouts of depression and his experience with addiction and then recovery, was one of association, not only as a parent, but as a best friend who I had a lot of affinity to in terms of, having a shared experience. And so while my father was alive, we had the great benefit. I had the great benefit. I can't speak for him, but I had the great benefit of getting to understand why he was experiencing the things he was experiencing and starting to acknowledge the steps he took to take care of his well-being. Specifically, he found great joy in exercise and connecting with people through performing. These are two things that he found to be very restorative for him, and also something that he found sustaining and provided those two things specifically provided a wellspring of energy, enjoyment, and ultimate sustained I want to say recovery, but sustained support, mental health supporting mechanisms for him. And then later on, it helped sustain his recovery. So in getting to know him and what he was experiencing in terms of bouts of depression and also dealing with acute anxiety and later on in his life neurodegenerative issues associated with Lewy body dementia, I really started understanding, getting a deeper understanding of what it was that I was experiencing through my journey. And I found that my use of substances to self-medicate, specifically alcohol, was something that was shared through our family history and legacy. And so in getting a deeper understanding of that, I started questioning why I was doing the things I was doing to support myself, ultimately in an unsustainable way. And through that experience, what became clear was that I could not continue doing what I was doing. But coinciding with that was finding myself extremely traumatized, and also having my habits associated with participating in self-medication and addictive behavior greatly increased and amplified, coinciding with my dad dying by suicide. And that set off a period of my life in which I was deeply distraught. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I was drinking alcoholically to manage both the trauma, but also the associated anxiety, stress, and bouts of depression associated with it. And I ultimately found my life, the way in which I was living life, to be unsustainable. And so I realized something really had to give. And the first thing I realized is that my self-medicating, my drinking alcoholically, was worsening my condition and ultimately degrading my mental health pretty severely. Through that experience, I realized that a couple things needed to change. One is I needed to find healing for the trauma. And I started down that path and realized that something that was extremely supportive and helpful for me was committing time to causes, volunteering, working with different initiatives, giving my time, ideally contributing my passion and expertise around things that I wanted to share. And that ultimately catalyzed new ways of thinking about how service could ultimately heal me. And the first thing I did, which was really eye-opening, was I started teaching at San Quentin Prison. I was teaching a financial literacy class over a period of time. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. It is something that helps me find purpose and clarity, and ultimately gives me reason to show up for others. And that was a starting point for me. Ultimately, I found myself drawn more to mental health initiatives, specifically working with organizations that have a focus on young people and adolescents, because I found that working with those organizations helped heal me, but also coinciding with that helped me find opportunities to support people around their mental health at inflection points in their life when they could really deeply benefit from mental health supporting communities, programs, resources, educational curricula, and the like. And so that was a major eye-opening moment for me. Committing time to mental health initiatives was, for me, the most healing thing I could do for the trauma, aside from committing to things like therapy and focusing on the next thing I'd like to speak about, which is finding opportunities to stop self-medicating and focusing more on the underlying causes and take a path towards recovery. And so for me, what came hand in hand with finding service to be very healing for the trauma was stopping to self-medicate using alcohol. And that experience for me was something that brought initially an enormous amount of stress. Cutting something out that I was using over a period of years to manage my anxiety, to manage what I was going through, was really challenging for me. And fortunately, I had the good benefit of participating and integrating 12 steps into my life. That was something that was very helpful. But I also found opportunities to actually integrate healthy mental health hygiene rituals into my life to actually support and fill the gap of what I've been essentially absolutely filling to the brim with alcohol and other substances to help manage my well-being. And so through that discovery process, I realized that that in order to commit to advocacy and finding service through happiness, I had to actually take care of myself in a very material, in a very conscious, and in a very focused way. And once I can show up for myself, then I can show up for my, pardon me. Once I show up for myself, then I can show up for others. And that would be analogous to filling your cup before you can pour or share your cup with others, or taking on oxygen before you share oxygen with others. And that is something that was a nuanced but extremely important epiphany for me. The minute I started prioritizing myself and valuing my well-being as a means of being able to show up in my best way for service and for mental health-oriented initiatives, it created a perpetuated enrichment loop, I call it, that ultimately enables me to find meaning, to find happiness, and to find a grounded point of not only stability, but growth in my life. And so in embracing the model of post-traumatic growth, I find myself deeply engaged, both in terms of the organization that I run, which is a mental health support company focused on providing mental health supporting products for others. It's called PIM. It stands for Prepare Your Mind. Not coincidentally, it's also my middle name, not Prepare Your Mind, but PIM. It was given to me by my father because he said it sounded vaguely Welsh. And it's a nice way to honor him, to support mental health of other folks, and also to raise money and awareness for mental health initiatives that I'm so passionate about. And then coinciding with that, I find myself working deeply with several organizations focused on an approach that I call systems-based mental health advocacy. And that systems-based advocacy is broken down for me personally into 5 categories or 5 verticals. And those 5 verticals that I classify are programming, that involves the development of educational curricula, potentially digital tools, potentially communities that ultimately support people in providing mental health supporting experiences, ideally oriented around impact and optimized around access, parity, and high quality care. So programming, that's the first vertical. The second is awareness, that generally focuses around educating different constituencies, audiences. They can be focused around campaigns, and generally they require media or some form of either advertising or distribution to enable people to understand the message at hand. So that's awareness, that's the second vertical. The third is research. And research can relate to work done by academic institution or not-for-profits. Sometimes it can relate to research done by for-profit organizations, companies, and the like. But ultimately it relates to finding ways to gather data and apply heuristics and the scientific method to ultimately understand how to best apply protocols, services, products, programs to best support people in their general mental health and well-being. So that's the third, that's research. And then the fourth is advocacy. This is a general strategic coalition building approach. It involves partnerships taking a lens towards development, ultimately thinking through growing the pie versus thinking of an environment as a zero-sum environment. And generally it involves a lot of coordinating, working with different organizations, and also applying a grand vision to work towards with a strategy applied to that. And so that's the fourth vertical, advocacy. And then the fifth is policy. And really what that relates to is educating stakeholders and seeking to influence lawmakers around how to apply pragmatic policy that's focused on, again, parity, high quality access to care, and furthering the narrative around providing innovative experiences to support constituencies. So, so that's the fifth vertical, policy. And this is the approach I take when it comes to making change on a systems-based level. I work with several organizations to do so. The organization I mentioned earlier is an organization called Bring Change to Mind. It's focused on developing programs with, I might have mentioned it earlier, maybe I didn't, but I believe I did. It involves developing programs in high schools that create peer-to-peer supportive communities in high schools throughout the US. And also the organization launches anti-stigma campaigns focusing on breaking down the stigma associated with mental health. And that organization was founded by the actor Glenn Close 10 years ago this year. And it's making a big difference in schools throughout the United States with the wait list. And we're continuing to grow and continue to impact in a positive way thousands of students throughout the US. The second is an organization called United for Global Mental Health. That's an organization focused on advocacy and policy on a global level. And I've been working with that organization for 2 years as of this point. And the third organization I work with is an organization called Inseparable. This is an organization based in the US focused on US-based policy and advocacy. And that organization has helped me get a deeper understanding of how to both influence and educate stakeholders around pragmatic policy focused on focused on parity, access, and high quality care. And then the fourth organization that I work with focused around mental health is an organization called Project Healthy Minds. And that organization is focused on advocacy and campaigns, specifically awareness campaigns, in addition to developing resources to help people find precision-oriented mental health care. So I love what I do. It's exciting. Every day I'm learning all sorts of new things. The path to getting me to where I am today was a winding one relating to some trauma, but a lot of healing. And ultimately, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to do the service-oriented work and advocacy that I find as part of my journey, my healing and recovery journey. So that's my story in a nutshell. It's been an exciting one, and I look forward to discussing more with Dr. Stangler, who I am proud to get to know as a friend.
Zach, and the feeling or feelings are mutual, sir. We introduced you by noting that you would be telling us stories about love, and you have indeed. And love inevitably, as we know too well, involves pain, loss, trauma. And in your life, these elements were so profound. As you describe your life, they threaten to derail its course and your own health and happiness. But instead, you were able to pause, reflect, and deliberately refashion a life, recognizing, as you have stated a number of times, the critical importance of service. And you chose as the focus of that service mental health and mental resilience. So Zak, as soon as you began to elaborate the 5 verticals necessary for comprehensive systemic change, you gave yourself away a little in sharing that rigorous thinking that you employ. So you hold a master's of business administration, an MBA from Columbia University, one of the most greatly esteemed academic institutions in our country. Tell us about that decision. Business school, why?
Great question. I decided to go to business school because I started my career focused specifically on creative disciplines. I started at Electronic Arts, making video games in a production capacity. And I so love being creative and applying a creative lens when it came to creating products and developing new experiences. But what was lacking in that was focus on more of the back end of how an organization works. And I so embraced the creative elements of what I was doing early in career, but I really want to get a deeper understanding of the systems and the elements at play when it came to developing a business, when it came to understanding how financial markets worked, when it came to understanding how companies operate, both in terms of governance and the programs they deploy. And so I decided to get an MBA because I wanted to deepen my understanding and operationalize myself as a creative. I felt like it was complementary to the skills I possessed, and wanted to further build out a skill set and an approach to thinking about my career that enabled me to scale over time. And so that's where the MBA came from. It was really about leveling up my understanding and being able to participate in a meaningful way, scaling my career as I scale working with companies, while also leveling up my understanding, my knowledge, my experience, and ultimately accelerating my career path.
It's so interesting, Zak. It occurs to me as you describe that, when you were talking about the joys in your father's life, you elaborated 2 primary ones: exercise and acting. And in a sense, that parallel, the rigors and the discipline necessary to both in the end, but certainly the complementary way that the discipline of exercise relates to the more creative art of acting. So in a sense, you've done the same thing and played that out on a different stage, if you will.
Yeah. Well, my father was passionate about other things too. He was also an avid collector of toys and was also very passionate about spending time with his family. So, there were other things too. Yeah, for me personally, it's funny. I'm a lot like my grandfather, my dad's dad, who was an executive at Lincoln Mercury and was a pretty buttoned up individual. He always saw the aspirations of my dad to be almost like a hobby. and wanted to push my dad more into a career that he felt was uh, that he felt had more utility, like welding. So, it was interesting because for my dad, the exercise, the athletic, the physical component was very much part of his training. He went to Juilliard, and he spent some time performing as a mime. So the physical component of what he learned as part of his craft ultimately, I believe, manifested into his appreciation for exercise and taking care of himself, in a number of different ways. But that's just a guess.
As was mine, as was mine, Zach. But uh, there is something so touching about this, as you described it, kind of best friend story in terms of the mutual recognition of the kinds of challenges each of you were facing separately and together. But going for a moment back to your business background, and I'm glad to see you've taken the buttons off mostly, despite Grandpa. Uh, we can look at the scope of your work, and it is, as we have gotten to know each other, I have been so impressed by that. But we can look at the scope as a kind of investment portfolio, if you will. You taught financial literacy to residents of San Quentin, and an important element of financial literacy is recognition of the need for a certain amount of diversity in the portfolio. And your mental health portfolio is certainly diverse. It ranges from advocacy to education, programming, policy, both in the public and private sectors. You deeply support mental health philanthropy, and you've created a mental health product yourself, a platform and a business, PIM. How do you decide, Zach, where to focus your energy amongst so many critical mental health initiatives, especially during this time of such great need? And do you see that allocation evolving over time, and what will be the ingredients to influence that?
It's a fantastic question, and I really appreciate you asking me. So I think how you're framing it, taking a diversified approach, is one way I'm thinking about it. It's also a matter of managing risk, both in terms of how I spend time and the type of partnerships I like engaging in. Meaning, the more early stage ventures that you take on, the more risk you take on. So for me, I take on a certain allocation of risk at a given time that relates to investing. I invest in consumer tech, consumer oriented mental health nonprofits generally, and other companies as well. But at the early stage, you take on risk investing with them. And just like I started a mental health supporting startup, there's risk associated with that. And so the way in which I balance that out is finding organizations and institutions that have less risk associated with them, that have been around for a while, that when you engage with them, there's some consistency with them. Just like when it comes to making, more diversified investments, I like also investing in more established products, companies, funds, and the like, to balance out the risk profile of engaging in high risk but potentially high reward, high impact activity. So, I do see it as kind of a diversification and risk consideration. Also coinciding with that, I also see it as an opportunity to learn. I'm a student. I'll always be a student. And as part of that, if there are people developing innovative experiences, researching cutting edge protocols and the like, I want to engage, I want to learn, I want to understand and get a deeper insight into how we can change the narrative, how we can make an impact. Again, the risk consideration comes into play. If you're involved with nothing but cutting edge, innovative experiences, and you're not understanding what's going on with the status quo and the policy realm or things like that, you're ultimately developing a less expansive lens and focus more on some very narrow approaches. Not to say they won't be extremely helpful and supportive and potentially transformative. It just requires a balancing out. And so, the majority of my time is spent running my company. And when it comes to working with mental health initiatives and organizations, I orient towards under promising and over delivering. Because the alternative is I spread myself too thin, and you pay lip service to doing all these things and you don't end up doing them in the way that they need to get done. And so there's a couple of lenses I apply to things, but the key thing is can I take this on? If I do take it on, what's the probability of success associated with it? Who are the people involved? Can I learn from them? Can they potentially learn from me? Can I take a student mindset to this? And will it help me advance my learning and understanding of myself, just as I hope to contribute to learning, understanding of a community or organization that I'm a part of?
Again, Zach, if I may be so presumptuous, let me add to that list of considerations. I hear you talk about assessment of risk, about love of learning, but clearly there's another element as well. And again, it has to do with love and passion. You are doing things that are consistent with core values and your sense of personal purpose. You're investing in things that have meaning to you, and then the calculus is assessed by all the rest. But you are a man of purpose, who is very value driven.
Yes, I certainly am. And I think I in developing a set of values, they're primarily focused around, relative to mental health. The first couple heuristics I apply relate to, is an organization focused around parity, access, and quality? So it's you can filter for that. That doesn't necessarily relate to my value set. It relates to kind of shared objectives. But then in terms of my value set, it's one of kind of, can I surround myself with high integrity people? Can I function in a high integrity way? Can I take a lens of openness and vulnerability? Can I be resilient in my actions? And I'm working through this because I can be fixated on different things, and it's part of my obsessive nature, and I need to be mindful of that. And on top of that, does it help me connect with people? Is it community driven versus self-aggrandizing? And I need to ask myself these things. What's the intentionality? Am I doing this to boost profile? In some cases, that might not be a bad thing. This can be very valuable and useful. But is it doing it just for my own sake, for my ego's sake, or are we doing it in order to expand opportunity to coordinate and work with organizations? And so I try to bring intentionality to what I do and how I do it. Often, I can lose track of the value orientation. But generally, because I've surrounded myself with great people who tend to be oriented around empathy and appreciation and making a difference, it generally it's a loop, a self-perpetuating loop of where I end up meeting more and more great people.
So you're saying basically it works. And actually you're alluding to something that you and I had spoken very briefly about in an earlier conversation that we agreed might be premature to discuss now, but Zak, you're there, and that is thinking about resilience on an individual level. You know, what are the elements? You say you surround yourself, you're very conscious about with whom you do surround yourself. And what are the elements, the components of a resilient organization? One of them may be having you involved.
So the element, so here's the thing is that in this day and age, the more resilience that is baked into an organization, both on a values level, in terms of governance, in terms of operations, the more it's able to deal with shocks and events that can be very destabilizing. And this modern era is one filled with shocks and events that can be very destabilizing. And so, you know, something we've spoken about before, but I think really could be applied using emerging models to organizations, whether they're Fortune 500 companies or startups, is thinking about the nature of neuroplasticity and expanding beyond that. How can we develop more plastic organizations that are more resilient, that can manage through very challenging, disruptive times? And, you know, we saw some organizations manage through the pandemic and now potentially a post-pandemic transition much better than other organizations. You go to a remote work environment and it's extremely disruptive for people. You know, it's for those with children, there's the premise of remote schooling that needs to be combined with this. You have the idea of not clocking, the premise of not clocking out, of just being on all the time. And the expectation of, you know, if you're working from home, that you'll be available from home. These are things that can be very disruptive for people. They've greatly enhanced stress and anxiety across the board. And the question is, how can you instill a value set? How can you instill a values-based governance model that can enable an organization to be more resilient, that can enable it to seamlessly roll with a lot of challenging elements and external circumstances that are very disruptive in so many different ways? And so, you know, I think personally, when it comes to thinking about resilience, I look at organizations a lot. It's just in my nature. When it comes to my personal level of resilience, it's something that I have to build up every day. I don't wake up resilient. I just don't. It's not in me. I'm a sensitive person. And so I need to find grounding opportunities to really get me centered. And I have to apply these mental health hygiene rituals, gratitude exercises, focus on breathing and meditation, focus on eating well, a number of different things that I need to apply to just manage through, you know, a challenging time. I don't wake up resilient. And for people who do, I laud you. I laud you for being able to do that. But so I've had to bake resilience into my regimen.
So Zak, it's interesting. I'm not certain if we're really talking about, shock and disruption, I remember not that long ago, we were talking about shock and awe. I'm not so sure resilience is baked into anyone. I mean, I think there's again a continuum, no doubt. But during this time of COVID, we have all been stressed on that continuum. And the so-called most resilient of us has had to do some significant work. It doesn't happen magically. When we think about neuroplasticity and we think about that little guy of yours and that little wee one about to come, they are machines of neuroplasticity. Change is what they do. Their brains change all the time. Once we pass that critical point of maturation, which is 25-ish or so, we have to work at it. And part of that work involves a certain tolerance and respect for distress. We have to accept that. We have to embrace it to the degree that we can congratulate ourselves for accepting the distress and working through it. But there's no magic to that. So you are not alone, sir, in that. Your level of awareness may be very different. And that's a positive thing. But neuroplasticity as a so-called grown-up doesn't come naturally to any of us. It would be great fun to talk about what constitutes a neuroplastic organization as well as individual. And really part of what you're describing about are epigenetics. And, with whatever we are born in terms of the propensity for OCD as a child, whatever genes we are born with that are part of depression, anxiety, vulnerability to addiction, to OCD as a child. And all of those are complex disorders, none of which are governed by one gene. So they're all polygenic. We do have the capacity to affect some control over our DNA and the expression of our genes by how we take care of ourselves and the environment in which we put ourselves, our internal and external environment. And frankly, Zak, you just started naming the list of all of these sort of self-care routines or epigenetic interventions. It's just another way of looking at them. How we sleep, how we eat, how we exercise, how we relax, the friends we involve ourselves with. You are a very epigenetic savvy gentleman and who is working hard and appropriately so to control the expression of your genes. And stress is an epigenetic intervention, and how we control stress affects how our genes are expressed as well. That's for part 2 of your visit. There's going to be a part 2. That's a question, barely, but it's certainly an invitation. I wanted to move back to hear a little bit more about some of the organizational focus, because you mentioned reducing stigma, and you mentioned it a number of times. And I have a different kind of question. Facing the challenge of a mental health disorder is difficult enough, but there's, as we know, another layer of pain that comes from dealing with the reactions of other of others to these conditions. How might, Zak, even the best intentioned of us, those who believe we are free from prejudice, inadvertently propagate and contribute to stigma?
Oh, how might we contribute to stigma? I mean, it's inherent in a lot of the things we do. It's just, it's part of the media we consumed growing up. It's the language we use. And I mean, to be clear around language, I don't believe in using specialized language to uh, to create exclusivity, specifically in terms of, you know, the dialogue of mass culture, dialogue and media and things like that. I figure the more that we can use common tropes and analogies and understanding, the more it provides opportunities for access and deeper understanding of what someone's going through.
You know, way back when, Zak, mental illness was understood to be the representation of a person who had been possessed by the devil. So it's that degree of badness which suggests a tremendous degree of fear and a sense of, you know, life being out of control and bad and dark, because we can't deal with the devil. So there are those primal elements from way back when. And when you talk about the use of language, I think then also about your resilient and plastic organization, where the environment is safe enough that people can call each other on that in a curious way, in a non-judgmental way. Because otherwise the lexicon becomes embedded in that culture too. And when you talk about the lexicon, when I first heard you talk about it, I thought about I thought about that old film, my God, post World War II, South Pacific, you've got to be carefully taught. So you use those words and your son learns those words and those affects as well. So words are indeed very, very important. And a different kind of question. You, Zak, are the child of a celebrity. What burdens did that confer on you? And how did that affect your capacity to freely live your life and expose who you were and how you were feeling?
Well, you know, I was raised in an environment. I was raised in the Bay Area, in San Francisco specifically, in an environment where I wasn't really surrounded by show business and entertainment. It could be considered a reasonably normal childhood. I was a child of divorce, so that had its own set of, you know, interesting elements associated with it. But you know, for me, I didn't really understand the, the magnitude of my father's celebrity and the like until I kind of hit kind of my teens, because for me it was just dad, you know, and so uh, I was raised in a way in which, you know, education was prioritized, and you know, the idea that you work through and make it on your own merits. I think that's an important value set that was instilled within me. But you know, I lived in the shadow for a long time. I felt like, oh, I needed to go into show business. I needed to go into entertainment just to prove myself. And that's ultimately not the case. That's not how I felt it's not ultimately what I realize is what's sustaining and enriching for me. I'm my own person, and ultimately it took me a while to get to that point.
Well, that also suggests to me there's again a reason that you describe your father as your best friend. You come from a lot of love. That's very clear, Zak. That's clear in how you feel, what you exude, what you say, who you are. Sadly, we're going to have to conclude our time together, and I wanted to share a few words from Charlie Chaplin. To truly laugh, you must be able to take your pain and play with it. And as I know you know, tragedy and comedy both elicit deep insights into the human condition. And the two are viewed by scholars as not different entities, but fully complementary perspectives. The power of comedy allows us to experience adversity, to utilize it to promote resilience and strength. And great comedy also helps us negotiate painful truths. Your father gifted us with superb comedy to make this world a better place. That was his service to the world. Your exposure to the painful truths of failures within our mental health system and your commitment to righting these egregious wrongs is your service, Zak. And you too are making this a better world, like father, like son, and we hope many generations to follow. We are so grateful and look forward, as I said earlier, to supporting your work in whatever ways we can. Thank you, Zak.
Thank you, Dr. Stangler. It was such a pleasure. I really, really love doing this. So thank you.
To our loyal global audience, we invite you to visit aspenbraininstitute.org for more information about both Zak Williams, but also further references to the multiplicity of his work with a variety of initiatives that he has named, such as Project Healthy Minds, Bring Change to Mind, and absolutely PIM, as well as all ABI recordings, resources, and scheduled events. Thank you all. See you soon.